Hands were shaken, pictures taken, and consent given to end the hostilities on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. It took the Afghan Foreign Minister Amir Muttaqi and the chief spy 13 hours of talks to agree on what they had already agreed upon in Doha years earlier, that they shall not allow their country to be used against any other country. Yes, Pakistan and Afghanistan have just signed a ceasefire agreement which states that issues shall be resolved through dialogue. However, this isn't the first time the Taliban have signed a peace agreement in Doha. A similar deal was struck at the exact location 5 years ago with the US. The Taliban vowed not to let their territory be used for terrorist activities against anyone. Pakistan not only helped the Taliban in reaching this agreement with the US, but also supported the group diplomatically. But now, Pakistan has had to take strong retaliatory action against the policies of the same Taliban it once supported. So the sensitive question now is, how did Pakistan and Afghanistan become foes from friends? Back in early 2020, Pakistan played a key role in bringing the Afghan Taliban to the negotiating table with the United States. The talks held in Doha, Qatar, led to the famous peace agreement signed on 29 February 2020. Now, on paper, this was the first real hope for ending decades of war. Pakistan's security establishment quietly celebrated this as a diplomatic victory. But not everyone was convinced. Some analysts warned that the Taliban might not keep their promise, and once the US left, the Taliban could sweep into Kabul and Pakistan might face a blowback from militant groups emboldened by that success. They were right. By mid-2021, the Taliban had surrounded Kabul. Ashraf Ghani had fled, and on 15 August 2021, the Taliban entered the Afghan capital, ending 2 decades of Western-backed rule. Pakistan suddenly faced a familiar nightmare, a resurgence of terrorism at home. Groups like the banned Tehreek-e-Taliban, as in the TTP, found new sanctuaries to operate from across the border from Afghanistan. The government attempted to negotiate with the TTP through the Afghan Taliban, but those talks never really succeeded in eliminating the problem. Islamabad felt betrayed. And then last week, the border between the two countries was rocked by its most intense violence in years. The intense flare-up underscores an important lesson for Afghanistan, that it simply cannot allow the TTP terrorists to attack Pakistan. And amidst all this, Indian media, which rarely ever cares for the loss of innocent civilians' lives in Afghanistan, suddenly seemed to be distraught by the death of 3 aspiring cricketers. But more on that later. Fast forward to this past weekend. After years of violence, diplomatic breakdowns, and border skirmishes, Pakistan and Afghan Taliban have once again met in Doha. This time, the agreement, mediated by Qatar and Turkey, is modest but significant. Now, all of this is a step forward, but the language matters. The ceasefire is described as meaningful and complete, yet there is no joint public declaration and only statements have been made by each side. One such statement was given by the Taliban Defense Minister Mullah Yaqub, who said that the Durand line between Afghanistan and Pakistan is imaginary, which, according to analysts, gives the impression that the Taliban don't respect Pakistan's territorial integrity. He also reiterated that Pakistan's issue with the armed group is an internal matter and has nothing to do with them, which again makes it seem like they're not in the mood to do anything about the TTP problem. The ceasefire agreement also doesn't mention the TTP directly. It only speaks of groups that carry out attacks rather than naming them. This gap in shared recognition adds to the distrust, complicates mechanisms for border management, and also weakens long-term solutions for cross-border militancy or even refugee flows. But here's why it's important for both Afghanistan and Pakistan to resolve matters sooner than later. The first is obvious. The border fights killed dozens of civilians and hundreds of people were wounded. with trade disrupted and crossings closed along the 2,600-kilometer-long frontier. And that's a major loss. And the second is that if Pakistan and Afghanistan fight each other, they both weaken. And that opens space for external influence to expand. Yes, I'm talking about India. Here's the thing. While Pakistan and Afghanistan trade accusations, a much bigger game is unfolding in the region. India's ruling ideology, championed by the BJP, increasingly promotes the concept of Akhand Bharat or Greater India. It's an idea that imagines reuniting all the lands that were once part of ancient India, from Pakistan and Bangladesh to Sri Lanka, Nepal, and even Afghanistan. Now, regardless of how realistic that goal is, the symbolism matters. It's a vision that undermines the sovereignty of every neighboring state. So when Afghans and Pakistanis fight each other, they weaken their collective ability to resist that pressure. It's in India's interest for Pakistan and Afghanistan to remain divided, suspicious, and economically weak. But it's in our own interest to rebuild trust, cooperate against terrorism, and focus on coexisting rather than fueling grudges. So 5 years later, the lessons are clear. Unfortunately, Pakistan's hard work in Afghanistan didn't pay off. But Afghanistan still does have a chance to correct its course. The Doha 2025 ceasefire is not the end, but it could be a good beginning. If Afghanistan can look past the propaganda and backing for the TTP, its future could be far better. Because at the end of the day, peace between Pakistan and Afghanistan isn't just about border security, it's about protecting the heart of Asia itself.